Welcome. We're delighted that you've joined us today for Growing Community, part of a series of webinars brought to you by the McKay Educational Resource Centre at Caven Library here at Knox College. My name is Laura Allery, and I'm the coordinator of the McKay Centre. And I'm going to be your on-camera host today. And behind the camera, we have Stephanie Hanna doing technical hosting. So thank you, Stephanie. After a brief introduction, I'm going to turn things over to our guest, Kristine O'Brien. And after her presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions. If something occurs to you while Kristine is speaking, or she mentions a resource and you think, oh, I didn't catch the title of that, or you have a question in mind and you don't want to forget it, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can also use the Q&A button in the ribbon or the menu on the bottom of your screen. And Stephanie and I will make sure that those questions get to Kristine at the end. And finally, I need to let you know that this webinar will be recorded, and all the registered participants will receive a link after the event. Now, we come from many places to gather in this virtual space. Wherever it is we live and work, we can be sure that we were not first. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the place where I'm sitting right now, the land on which Knox College is situated, has been a site of human activity and rest for over 15,000 years. It is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And we're truly grateful to have the opportunity to be on this land. And we commit to working toward repair and right relations with Indigenous communities. I also want to say a special thank you to the Ewart Endowment that makes this webinar possible. The McKay Educational Resource Centre is part of the continuing legacy of Ewart College, and we are here to support churches as they explore new ways of being communities of hope in the world. So GROW is, let me try that again. GROW is an initiative of the McKay Centre, which brings together resources from our library collection with people who are doing exciting and innovative ministry in a variety of settings. And today we are delighted to welcome Kristine O'Brien. Kristine is the Executive Director at Crieff Hills Retreat Centre near Guelph, Ontario. This 250-acre farm is part of the mission of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and it offers rest and renewal to individuals and groups of all faiths and no professed faith. Kristine is a member of the Puslinch Township Heritage Advisory Committee. She serves on the board of Seeds of Diversity Canada and regularly preaches in local churches. She's also an amateur forager who loves baking cupcakes. She specified cupcakes, but I know there's a lot more to it than that, and growing vegetables. And I believe Kristine is even a learning beekeeper. Is that? Yes, that's right. Kristine and I were students together at Knox many, many years ago, and I've personally experienced her hospitality both in her home and at Crieff Hills. And I can tell you that what's happening at Crieff, especially in terms of forming intentional community, living gently on the earth, honoring Sabbath, has so much to teach us in the churches. So we're really grateful that Kristine has made time to come and be here with us today. So thank you, Kristine. Welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Laura. It's lovely to have you welcome me. We have been friends for a long time. And as I begin, I too want to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from Crieff Hills, and we are on the ancestral lands of the Attawandaron, Shenandoah, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, and the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And like I said, I am thrilled to bits to get to join you today. I want to share with you a little bit about what we're doing, a little bit about where we've been and where we're going. And I want to do that by showing you some lovely things Let's see. There we go. Let's start out with some lovely things. But this place, some of you may know already, you may have been here, but a long time ago, if I can advance this slide, there we go. A long time ago, this is a little church in the village of Crieff, originally called Fraserville. We know it as Crieff. And this little church in the 1800s called a minister from Scotland, the Reverend Andrew McLean, and they brought him over because he spoke the Gaelic. And he came into this little community. He married a woman named Catherine. He had 2 sons, John and Hugh. But he died young, and he left behind the 2 boys and their mother. They left the village of Crieff and moved to Owen Sound. And that's where the boys grew up. But John Bain, John, the oldest, he didn't stay there into adulthood. He moved to Toronto, and he had dreams of being an educator. He wanted to be a teacher. And that was a great dream that didn't work out very well. Apparently, he wasn't very good at some of the academics that were required to be a teacher. And instead, he began to explore the world of journalism. And so you will perhaps have heard of Maclean's magazine. Chatelaine is another magazine you might know, the Financial Post. Those are all publications that we often call him Colonel, used in the militia. Colonel Maclean started, he actually started dozens and dozens of publications. And during his career, his very successful career, his mother died, and he went back to that little village of Crieff, and he discovered that the churchyard was in disrepair. The manse was not inhabited. The church was struggling. And so he offered to help, and he called in some of his friends. The Olmsted brothers went on to become very famous landscape architecture firm, and they did some drawings, and he had a lot of work done. He paid for a lot of their work to be done in and around the church. And the congregation was so grateful. And so they actually offered him the manse and a little bit of acreage around it, a few acres. And he turned that into his summer home. This is him standing just outside of the manse. It was a country road. And he became a gentleman farmer, which means he loved the idea of farming, but he had people. So the people did a lot of work for him. He gradually bought up the surrounding farms. So he came to own 300 acres around the manse, right near the church. And he grew that into the Crieff Hills Farm. It became quite prosperous. It was a demonstration farm, which meant that he experimented a lot. He tried a lot of new things. He had Ayrshire cattle, and those are dairy cattle. He had pigs. He had grain that he grew. He was reforesting some of those fields with an eye to conservation. He had orchards and gardens, very beautiful gardens. He had such extravagant taste in, even though it was a farm. You can see just behind the truck, if you look to your left, there's a window. They're actually on the barn were window boxes. They're supposed to have been filled with red geraniums. I've heard stories about that. So this was a very beautiful farm. And he loved that farm, went up on weekends. He actually was connected to a congregation in Toronto. St. Andrew's King Street was his home church, but he would go up on weekends and in the summertime and spend his time up there. But he died in 1950. And at that time, he left all of the 250 of the 300 acres and the buildings were all left to the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And in 1975, the Presbyterian Church decided to open a retreat center, which now we know as Crieff Hills. And so the buildings were built. These two, Matthew and Mark, were the first 2 buildings to be built in 1975. And those are not the only buildings, certainly, but they are the conference facilities. So groups can come and stay in sort of hotel-like rooms. They each have their own bathroom, and they eat their meals together in the dining room. But we do other things here. The Pines is one of the places where people can come and stay on their own. So couples or individuals tuck themselves away. And this has about 5, but there are a couple of other historic properties, there's a little hermitage or the prodigal, tiny little stone buildings that have been converted into suites. And then we also have a couple of historic homes. So this is from the Dove House, and these have been converted into retreat facilities for small groups. So if you're a group of 10 or a family, for instance, 10 or 14 people, you can go and stay. It's not unlike renting an Airbnb. Really, it has a full kitchen and all of those lovely things. We also do have, weddings and all kinds of other groups. We host our own yoga retreats and things like that. I arrived in 2018, and let me see here if I can find the right button. There we go. I arrived in 2018, and it was great fun to come in and to get to know this place. I'd been here about 18 months, and the world ended with COVID. It was here particularly difficult. You may have heard that the hospitality industry was hard hit. That would include Creve Hills. Everything came to a stop. We closed entirely. People weren't even allowed on the property, according to the local Board of Health. So we lost most of our staff, almost all of our staff. We had to let them, or they needed to go and be elsewhere. We lost a lot of money, obviously a lot of income, about 2 years worth of bookings. We lost. So it was time for #pivot. And that's what we did, is we began to experiment, and we tried all kinds of things. We did fail. I will tell you, we had some failures, and we also had some things that were successful, things that we learned along the way. And some of what I want to share today are the lessons we've learned, particularly during the last 3 years. The things that we have tried. I do believe in trying lots of new things. And I don't get too fussed about failure. It happens. But I came here having no idea. I mean, I've said this a million times. I have no idea what I'm doing, really. I came for the adventure, and I came after being in a pastorate for almost 20 years. I was in pastoral ministry, and I had lived in the suburbs my whole life. I had a small stint in a small town, but that was about it. I was a gardener. I kept vegetable gardens wherever I lived. But I had maybe some dreams. Wouldn't it be fun to have chickens? Lots of gardeners think that. I made offhand comments, wouldn't it be fun to have animals, especially once we were here? There was this barn. There was no farm here by the time I arrived. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice? Maybe we could tuck a few sheep back there in that barn. And, you need to be careful what you say out loud, really, because let's see here. There we go. Catch up with myself. See, when you say things, sometimes things happen. So we had a phone call from friends of ours who had sheep, and they said, hey, you've talked about sheep. How about now? And they had too many sheep. And so they shared. And we, as I've said, we didn't really know what we were doing. So we just pulled up in our minivan, and we put the sheep in the back. These sheep are from, some of you maybe will know the Carmichaels, Colin and Arminta. They're near Goderich. And so they sent us on our way with a little bit of advice. We picked up some hay and a waterer and a feeder, and we just started. It was time for some adventure. But these are not ordinary sheep. These are called Soay, S-O-A-Y. Our little Soay sheep. They are small. They're about half the size of the big fluffy commercial sheep that you might see or are familiar with for things like wool production. So the Soays are from the Hebrides, little islands off of Scotland. They're a primitive breed, so they haven't been bred for any particular characteristics. They're quite lovely, but we have them for a specific reason. We don't just have this kind because we wanted any sheep. These in particular eat buckthorn. This little critter is eating buckthorn, it's an invasive species, which has run riot here at Creve Hills for a long time, for generations. And it's a really harmful species, but it's the favorite food of these little Soay. So they enjoy eating it. And that means, there's the whole flock. That's almost all of the ones that we have right now. We started out with just a few, You can see the white one there. That's our ram named Salty. We do have names for them. They're all named after herbs. But what they need to do, what they're doing there, and what you can see them doing here, is because they eat buckthorn, we move them around every day. So except for in the dead of winter, we move them every day, and they go and they're helping us to clear away the buckthorn in various places. That does mean we herd them with their, we have electric fences. We have these temporary electric fences we put up for them during the day. And then we herd them back and forth. And I love that job. It's a very fun job to walk with the sheep out of the barn or back to the barn. But because of this routine, very early when we just had 3 and we still really didn't know what we were doing, there was a hot July afternoon when my husband Pat and I found ourselves running down the road, the concession, in our flip-flops. It was very sweaty and it was awful because the sheep had gotten out and away. They had gone away from the barn instead of toward the barn. And the sun was setting, because this is what we do at sundown. The sun was setting and we were very afraid because the sheep were running away from the barn. They were not listening to us hollering. We didn't know how to herd them. We hadn't done a whole lot of this before, and they ran out onto the road and they took a turn. They went at full speed toward the flock of sheep across the street. There's a sheep farm across the street, and they went headlong down the driveway, and we gave chase, panting and sweating along the way. And so we didn't know what to do. So there's a farmhouse across the street, and I went and banged on the door, and I hollered because there was nobody there. I hollered, "We need help. Our sheep got out. Can you help us?" And there was nothing. There was just silence and me and being very anxious. And then I heard this voice, and this woman hollered, and she said, "I'm coming. I'm going to get my boots." And I waited outside, and sure enough, this woman comes flying out of the house in her boots. And I had no idea who she was. She didn't know who I was. We'd never met. And she came running out of the house. She said, "Come on." And she got temporary fence panels, these big metal panels. And within seconds, her husband appeared out of nowhere. And I could not believe in less than 10 minutes, they had corralled our little sheep that we had no control over. They had managed to corral them into these little pens. And they kept saying these lovely things to us like, "Oh, don't worry. It happens to everybody." We weren't sure whether we could believe them or not, but they corralled them into their livestock trailer. And then they drove them. It was only across the street, but they drove them over. They helped us get safely. Everybody got back in the barn. They could not see. I was actually crying tears of relief. I had been so afraid, and they handled it beautifully. It turns out that was Peter and Julie. That was how we met our neighbors across the street. And Peter and Julie have 200 head of sheep. It turns out Peter's also a vet, and both of them work at the African Lion Safari just down the way. He is a large animal vet, but also he's an exotic animal vet. And so they had lots of stories to tell us, but they were just so kind, and they have continued to be incredibly kind. You can see on the right is a picture. They brought their sonograph over when we thought one of our sheep was pregnant. And sure enough, it's just like a regular ultrasound for people. And sure enough, they could confirm that pregnancy. And on the left, our first lamb, they came over and they weighed our lamb and they checked out to make sure that everything was safe. And Peter and Julie have continued to be fantastic neighbors. They have helped us. They've taught us about hoof trimming, and they were over actually today teaching us how to vaccinate. They have been really amazing, teaching us who know nothing, us from the suburbs, teaching us how to be farmers. So some of you will know Wendell Berry. If you don't know Wendell Berry, he is an author I hope that you will go and look for. This quote, "A good community ensures itself by trust, by good faith and goodwill, by mutual help." Wendell Berry is actually a farmer, and he's a poet and a writer. And this is from his newest book, but he certainly has all kinds of beautiful books that tell the story about farms and about the world, about creation and about neighbors. This is, let me see. I think I can do this so that I can talk to you again. We have been learning about being in community with our neighbors, with our immediate physical human neighbors in the last couple of years. Because we moved on site during COVID, it has been hard. But we've been learning things. We learned that meeting our neighbors had to be an intentional act. We really needed to go and, well, we literally banged on doors. But what we did, we went out and found people and we chatted with them wherever we could. I have been preaching more regularly, actually, right now at the local church that's closest, but I visited local churches to get to know who my neighbors were and get to know what the community is like. We had takeout meals were one of the things we experimented with during COVID because we couldn't have people in the dining room. And that amazingly introduced us to all kinds of neighbors. But it's hard. Sometimes rural communities, I think if you're from the city, you think, oh, in the rural neighborhoods, everybody is friendly and everybody knows each other. And we found that in our neighborhood, that just wasn't entirely true. This is a changing neighborhood south of Guelph. And so farmers are severing off parts of their lot. There are new homes being built, new people coming into the community. And so it's been a bit challenging. So like I said, we had to be intentional. We had to get off the property. My husband would go to the feed store. Gosh, he could stand and chat with people at the feed store and meet people. We also found people didn't gather in churches the way we know this. People aren't going to church the same way, and that presented a challenge. So our way in, one of our most successful ways into relationship with our neighbors has been vulnerability. We didn't know how to be farmers. We still don't really. We're very junior farmers, and we didn't know a lot about our area, about the geography. We didn't know how to look after animals. There was so much we didn't know, and so going to our neighbors and letting ourselves be vulnerable and saying we have no idea what we're doing. We don't know the answer to this question or that, and we've listened very carefully to them, and that has been great. That has been a really great way of connecting. But we also are participating in reciprocity as often as we can. And so where we can produce things, eggs or honey or maple syrup, we share those with our neighbors. We want to be able to participate and not be too greedy. So it's not just one-sided. March, it's great actually, Laura, that you invited me to speak in March, because March is another month when we think about community. There's a story I will tell you. Let me tell you the story. March is maple syrup month. You might see that in the news. We decided during COVID because, I won't say we had nothing else to do, but we decided now's a good time. Some of my family was home. My children and my husband had some extra time at home. And we've always thought, wouldn't it be great to make maple syrup? So we just jumped in and we bought some buckets and we put about 20 spiles into trees that we could figure out which ones were maple. Because of course there were no leaves on the trees. It was a bit tricky, but we did find 20 sugar maples and we watched, and amazingly, they filled up with sap. So then we went and some of you may already know about the maple syrup process, but we take those and we put the sap, that water, into these big 5-gallon pails. And that's done by hand. We don't have a fancy system. And we have had help from volunteers along the way, some of the time. And then those big buckets, they often were frozen by the time we just would on the weekends set up our little operation. It's a hillbilly setup with hotel pans over a fire. You can see the bricks. And so we would cart those big things of sap and we would empty them in and we would boil them down, which of course took an awfully long time. This is, for those of you who know the property, this is actually behind Dove House out by the Hermitage. And my husband and I looked after most of the boiling. Sometimes we were joined by other people, and we looked after virtually in that first year all of the carting of the sap. It had to go across country. Like I said, 5-gallon pails. We often would carry 2 at a time. And we would do that at the end of the day. because both of us were working in our offices. My husband is a funeral director, and he would come home at night. I would come home at night, and we would go out and begin collecting sap. See, here's me looking happy. I'm mostly happy doing this. And I have to tell you that there was one night in particular when I did not look as happy as I was in this photo, because it was the end of a long day. I had come home by myself. My husband was working very late. And in March, you just never know what you're going to get. It was a bit melty, so it was muddy, but there was still a lot of snow out there, so it was slippery. And I needed to go and empty all of the sap buckets, but they were overflowing. And so that meant they would spill all over me, getting them off of the tree and into those 5-gallon pails. And then I had to lug those 5-gallon pails, all kinds of them, even from just 20 trees. And I had to lug them all the way down to the shed. And so they're ridiculously heavy. They're something like 40 pounds each. And I had one in each arm. And I was pretty miserable. It was painful, and I was grouchy. And I'm not sure what did it, but all of a sudden I looked up, and it took my breath away. This beautiful sky. It was still, and it was quiet. And I thought, gosh, it is so beautiful out here. The stars, all in their familiar patterns, and they were shining and beautiful. And there was a bit of wind in the bare branches of the trees. It was that gorgeous color blue that just happens just once a day at dusk. And I hadn't even noticed. I'd been so busy being grouchy. I'd been so busy working hard and struggling that I hadn't noticed. And what's more, I realized I missed a lot, because so often I was inside. I was hiding, in the winter when it's cold. I didn't want to go outside. And so I missed things. Barbara Brown Taylor, in one of her books, one of her many beautiful books, said, where other people see acreage, timber, soil, and river frontage, I see God's body, or at least as much of it as I am able to see. In the only wisdom I have at my disposal, the Creator does not live apart from creation, but spans and suffuses it. When I took this job at Creve Hills, part of my motivation, part of my sense of call was to be outside more often. Now, we have a huge 7-circuit labyrinth. It's gorgeous. It was built by students from Canada Youth years ago. It's all made from fieldstone. It's a 7-circuit labyrinth, and I've always loved it. And when I accepted this position, I thought, I will go every day, and it will be such a good daily practice. I will walk the labyrinth. And in my first year, I walked it precisely 0 times. Not even once. I spent all my time in the office, and I had all kinds of work to do, and I had an hour-long commute. But then after I'd been working at the job for a year, our family moved up on site where we live now. And I thought, this is it. I am going to be on site. I will have so much more time now to be outside. And so I will walk the labyrinth now every day. Surprisingly, no, not at all. I meant to, we all have good intentions, and I didn't get outside. What forced me outside was beginning this farm. That finally meant I had to go outside, but I wasn't going outside to have a nice time, to be reflective and meditative. That's not why I was outside. I was outside because I was hauling sap and these huge buckets in March. I went outside because quail and chickens, which we had before too long, they need to be fed morning and evening. And I was outside because we had to herd the sheep morning and evening, because the vegetables had to be harvested. And the best time to harvest vegetables, particularly when it's hot, is first thing in the morning at sunrise, at 6 o'clock in the morning. I was outside because I had to be. I was forced out there for work. And it is a very different experience to be outside for farming, for hard work. That's entirely different than going to the park or sitting outside, enjoying yourself in backyard with a cool drink on a lovely afternoon. The discipline of farming, it started to teach me about how I was in community with creation. I had been before, I just didn't realize it. And the world outside of my door was teeming with life. That life was happening when I was asleep, when I was sitting inside, and I was missing it. There were plants and animals and organisms in the soil. Divine presence was absolutely everywhere. It was active and alive and busy. And farming helped me to discover that. I learned a lot of things through the experience of getting outside to be a farmer. Like I said, daily chores are a thing. Every farmer knows this. It's a learning thing for me. Thankfully, we have some staff to share that. But at the beginning, we really didn't. It was just our family, my husband and I did them every day. But reciprocity is something that we learned because, like I said, chickens and quail, we need to feed them. They need water. That's super important. It takes effort to look after those critters. But in return, they give us eggs. Gosh, it's this miraculous thing still to me that we give them water and feed and they give us food. These beautiful eggs. They're white eggs, brown eggs. We have some green eggs are being laid as well. And I always say thank you every time because it is still a miracle to me. Farming also taught me about pain. There is pain as a natural part of community. It's a reality. I mentioned buckthorn. Buckthorn is terribly invasive and it is hurting our land. It has not only does it send out shoots and it smothers everything around it by stealing the sunlight, but it in its roots excretes some kind of compound that actually contaminates the soil, so other plants can't or won't. Incredible power. It's a bully. It's a terrible bully in our forest and on our land. And one of the things we are doing is addressing that pain by tending for the plants and animals that are vulnerable. By taking away that buckthorn, we're giving the opportunity for the other plants to thrive. Farmers also know this. I am learning this. I don't get to control everything out there in the natural world. Farmers understand that the weather has such a huge influence. How the seasons change and what the seasons bring really impacts what we do. And, in the spring, like we'll wait for the ground to be dry enough. You can't do things while the ground is wet and you have no control over when it dries out. Storms came through. Gosh, we've had some really big storms and they take down all kinds of trees and they do damage that we wish it wouldn't do. Last year's drought, gosh, we were in a drought area here in Puslinch, near Guelph, and you just can't make up for it with artificial watering. It just is not the same for your plants. But we couldn't fix it. There was nothing that we could do except wait until there was relief. I've been learning as I spend more time outside that, and with animals in particular, there's a rhythm. There's this mysterious rhythm happening that has nothing to do with me. We have ewes, so female sheep, and we have a ram. We only keep one ram because rams don't like to get along. And so our little ram, Basil, we were buddies. He came to us as just a lamb. And so we were buddies. But what happened is the longer he was with us and as the seasons changed, as the fall arrived, Basil changed. And there's a reason they call them rams, and it's because they get rammy. And he rammed me. He became actually, as rams do, quite dangerous. He was talking to me, of course. He wasn't trying to hurt me, but he was talking to me and communicating with me about food or water or whatever it was he needed or wanted. But that intensified as breeding season began. And now we notice a change in behavior in the ewes. Pat was in the barn yesterday. I was down there with them, and we were talking about how the ewes are particularly friendly. They're getting ready for their babies. And so their behavior has changed. And that rhythm, we have no control over that rhythm. And they have their own language. They have their own cycles that they're following. And it's quite beautiful and quite mysterious and quite otherworldly. There is a divine rhythm built right into who they are. I started with that story about collecting sap and how uncomfortable it was. And I have learned that too about our relationship with creation, being in community with God's world. Being uncomfortable is, I would say, it's essential. It's not even just important. It's an essential part of being in relationship with God's natural world. I've always told my kids, if you can learn to be uncomfortable, you will encounter opportunities that you could not otherwise have. And that's absolutely true. If we stay inside, if we stay in our safe places that are well lit and comfortable, they smell good, they're tidy. If we stay in those places, we miss opportunities to be fully in community and in communion with the divine. There is mystery there. There's incredible beauty there that we will miss. But if we are willing to be uncomfortable, and if we are willing to be cold and wet, to get up early or to stay up late, we are invited into an intimacy, a unique kind of intimacy that make our lives richer and much more meaningful. It makes us better members of that community. It has changed how I think about garbage. It has changed how I use plastic, because I have a different and more intimate relationship with God's world, and I care about it in a different way now that I've been dragged outside and made uncomfortable. But if I'm going to speak about hard work, let's see. Hard work. So as I said, we lost almost all of our staff. I'm actually now the longest serving staff person at Creve Hills, and I've been here just over 4 years. So we thankfully are hiring again, and we're growing as a staff. So the tall guy taking the picture on your left there, that's Chef Matthew. Chef Matthew came to us just over a year ago. He's a fine dining chef, actually. He's been at places like Langdon Hall and Laura Mill, and he is amazing and cooks beautiful, beautiful things. We've also, in that picture, there's our sous chef is there. One of our new dishwashers is there. We have a property and facility manager who is doing incredible things with our property, and who I could sing his praises all day long. Someday, if you come out, I would love to introduce you. He cares for all 250 acres. We have 15 buildings on this site, both inside and outside. But of course, he has help. We have housekeepers who are here. We have a bookkeeper, administrator. We have all of these great people that we are adding. This is our mission, to offer rest and renewal, and it takes a whole team to be able to do that. But we're growing from almost nothing. And I'm very mindful that as we do that, we're forming a new community among our staff. And I want to be very careful about how it is we're building our staff. And so I'm thinking a lot about our priorities as a workplace. And so cake is where I start. I make cupcakes. I like to eat cupcakes. I have never met a dessert I didn't like. And so every staff member, we make note of their birthday. And so we gather, we'll have a staff meeting. Even if the only reason we need a staff meeting is just so that we can eat cake together, then we'll do that. I love that. I love the ritual. So they make fun of me because I am very silly. We do have to sing. Yes, we have to sing happy birthday. And yes, we need to have candles and we need to light them. It's really important to me. People are smiling in all of these pictures. It's a special thing. And we're very careful too about the kind of cake we eat. Steph loved brown butter icing. So that was what she would have. Or Victoria, who's in the office, she doesn't actually like cake that much, but she likes coffee cake. So then it could be coffee cake on her birthday. And those things help our staff to feel remembered and known. They help us to be together, right? And we celebrate that cycle of seasons together in that ritual of happy birthdaying. But we don't just eat cake. And so we do eat together. Just as a staff, we feed lots of people, but as a staff, we get together too. And sometimes we're celebrating. If it's not a birthday, sometimes it's an engagement or other milestones. Eating together. This is our summer staff last year. Actually, they had a meal together. You can see in the shade on a hot day. And that is important because we have non-work time together. So we can share our lives. We can tell stories. We get to laugh together and relax together a little bit. It's non-productive work time in the technical sense, but it's very productive in terms of building community when we share that time together. We also have done something different this year. We have traditionally hosted Christmas lunches, and that's great. We love to welcome people at Christmas time. But this year we tried something different, and we were leaning into our desire to offer rest to the most weary. And so what we did is we invited local nonprofit organizations to send their staff to enjoy a meal. It's just for free. Just come and enjoy your company among yourselves and eat really good food and just have a little bit of time to yourselves. And this actually is a photo of the staff who came from the Wellington Hospice, which is nearby, but we had the Cambridge Food Bank and a couple of other groups. They sent their staff. And we knew that it was going to be good. We knew it was lovely, and the people who came really enjoyed themselves. What I didn't anticipate was how important our staff thought it was and how excited they were when we were debriefing afterwards, because we do, when we host an event, debrief afterwards, what went well, what didn't go so well. I was really surprised. I was quite taken aback at how excited the staff were, because they watched these groups come in and they were enjoying their own community. They were among themselves. They laughed a lot. They had a really good time. They enjoyed the food. They could see those staff people connecting. And they were so happy to give that gift because they knew that all the people that were there spent much of their life helping others. And they really, really did love that. And they said right away, we need to do this every year. This is such a great thing. Let's make this a ritual for us. Let's do this every single year. We'll invite, the people who care for others, and we can take the opportunity to care for them. Casper ter Kuile, I really do. If you haven't read it, I totally recommend this book, The Power of Ritual. He says, how might I find deeper happiness? The science points to an answer in the abstract. Find more community. Deepen your connections with others. Be with others in meaningful ways. Find rituals to organize your life. It will boost your happiness, give you greater joy, and even add 10 years to your life expectancy, science suggests. For me, all of this is not just about food as a way of building community. All the food is part of that. It's not even just about ritual, the ritual of birthdays or of annual programs. All of this to me, particularly with the staff, is rooted in love. In the Bible, in the Hebrew scripture, the word hesed, I can't say it right, hesed. It's a beautiful word that doesn't have a great English translation. It's loving kindness. There's mercy and justice all wrapped up in this concept of hesed. And Jesus demonstrates that same deep sense of love that has justice and mercy and compassion and kindness all wrapped up in it. And that's the kind of love that I think is foundational for us as a staff, as a human community. Because it's more than just saying nice things, although it's lovely to say nice things. It gets to the heart of God's way of being and God's hope for community, human community. And it's marked by all of those things, justice and mercy and compassion and goodness and kindness. And that is manifesting itself among our staff in that genuine human connection of shared meals, being human with each other, treating each other well. I do love it when I catch our staff saying good things about each other when that person isn't around. We're doing in order to cultivate that kind of deep love is we're learning important human skills, things like how to say, I'm sorry. We make mistakes. All of us make mistakes, and it's completely human and it's okay. But sometimes we need to say, I'm sorry. We do get angry. We're allowed to be human. We absolutely, all of us have permission to be angry, but we also need to have good conversations about how to fix that. Rather than focusing on what was wrong, we focus on solutions. We blow off steam somewhere else and then come back. We look each other in the eye. We do our best to offer the benefit of the doubt. You know, if something goes south, I bet they didn't mean to do that. They weren't trying to be difficult. We focus on that and we try to coach each other in those things, in those very human community skills. We talk to each other. We don't talk about each other, and we solve things together. But that kind of love goes even deeper for me, particularly when it comes to staff. And I think this is an important thing for the church to talk about. Justice is a really important part of how we care for our staff and how we build community in churches. In 2022, Creve Hills became a certified living wage employer. And if you don't know what that's about, livingwage.ca, you can go and find it. We're a part of the Ontario chapter of being a living wage employer. What that means here in our part of the province, it means that minimum wage on our staff is $18.50. No one on our staff makes less than $18.50 an hour. By the end of 2023, that will go up to $19.95 an hour. So everyone who is on our staff will make at least $19.95 an hour. That means even our student dishwashers are making that rate. And we could probably, I'm sure, we could find people who would work for less. We could absolutely pay people less. But a living wage means that you could actually afford food and shelter, at least in theory. In this world, it's hard to know, but that is how, that's their scale. That's what it means. And so I want to make sure that we honor hard work with as much money as we can afford. We pay our staff. And I also want to acknowledge that these are humans who need to eat. They need to care for their children. They need a roof over their head. And we want to participate in making sure that they have those things, that they are very well looked after. That to me is love at its most practical level. And I think as the church struggles right now, I hear conversations in presbyteries. If you look at our our minimum rates of stipend, for instance, that's a place of concern. And I think a place where the church maybe needs to do a little bit of wrestling with how it is we can offer a just wage to everyone. Now let's see here, just before I finish. I have been deeply influenced by Henry Nouwen. I love Henry Nouwen. He writes all kinds of beautiful things. Here is what he says about community. He says, community is first of all a quality of the heart. It grows from the spiritual knowledge that we are alive not for ourselves, but for one another. All the kinds of community that I've talked about today are rooted in the heart. They're rooted in love. Love and community with our neighbors, our physical neighbors, the people who live next door and across the street. We strive for love, to know each other, to help each other, for reciprocity, for practical help with each other, to listen and learn from each other. Love is what we hope for in our relationship with God's creation, to share a deep intimacy so that we know each other well, and to be kind and just in our actions, to let our relationship with creation change the way we behave. Love is what we hope to cultivate in our human relationships with each other. We share in important ways when we break bread together, when we eat together, when we say, I'm sorry, and when we find solutions for the struggles. All of us want love and laughter and hope and meaning and goodness. And love is the root of all of that. Now, each of you are in your own communities. I don't know what your contexts are. I know all of us have different contexts. Mine is unique. But post-COVID, all of us are changing. Our communities are changing and growing. May God bless you on your journey, wherever you are. May God bless you with the gift of loving community. May God's blessings of kindness and mercy and justice, may they rest upon your neighbors and the natural spaces that are all around you, and with all those with whom you share your life. May God's love be among us. Amen.
Amen. Kristine, thank you. That was a beautiful, powerful, and theologically rich piece of storytelling. starting from the origins of the community, which I had only heard bits and pieces of. But I actually have pages of notes that I took while you were talking, because the stories that you told about the community that you're trying to create, just everything was so intricately connected. And I was thinking about timing. I have words written down, and some of those words, well, certainly chesed and love and justice, which you emphasized at the beginning, or rather at the end, but also vulnerability, risk, and failure, because those ones really leapt out at me. They carry such a fearful burden, and yet without them, we miss opportunities for the kind of growth and intimacy that you're describing. And what a time in the liturgical year to be contemplating these things. I mean, Lent is such a season of vulnerability. So I'm just so grateful for everything that you've shared. As an introvert, I'm processing and will continue to process for some time. I'm looking at our chat and our Q&A. If anyone has questions or comments for Kristine, she is more than happy to take them. And if not, you've given us so much to ponder and digest. So I'll just wait a moment and see if we have anything pops up.
Well, this is a great time for me to tell everybody to come and visit.
Yeah.
We're open every day of the year. So 365 days, we're open. Our website, creedhills.ca, does lay out a lot of things, but social media also tells our story. So both Instagram and Facebook, they're similar, but not the same. Mm-hmm. And that's a lovely place to, I cultivate my Instagram feed very carefully and put beautiful things there for myself. Yes. And so I strive to make sure that is something that people can enjoy, that there is beauty there. People can come on their own, people can come in groups, because we do have, church groups will come and they'll bring, have a big group. Sometimes it's a small group of 5 or 6 people, a session, for instance, will come and spend a day or a weekend and do some work. And we also, particularly post-COVID, we're welcoming individuals, people who really need a way. We have a couple of places on the property that are small, secluded suites, and there's no Wi-Fi. There are no neighbors. There's nothing. You look out onto fields out the door, and those I know are offering refuge and respite for people. So I would love to hear from people. I would love to meet people, see people. Come on along, and I always want to hear from the church if there are ways we can serve you or your community. We always want to know how it is that we can be helpful.
Okay, I'm still not seeing anything in Q&A or in the chat. And I'm sure that's because people are absorbing and thinking and working through those connections and figuring out how they apply in their own settings, because they certainly do. I mean, you're talking about your particular place, but one of my mantras that I have written on my wall is the shortest route to the universal is through the particular. So it's often those stories of the place where you are rooted that speak to someone else in their context. So you've given us much food for thought, and I'm grateful. Everyone who registered for the webinar will receive a recording, and also I'll go through and I'll pull out any resources that Kristine mentioned, some of the books that you quoted, and we'll put that together, and Stephanie will send it out as an email. So if you meant to note something down and didn't get a chance, don't panic. It will come to you in your inbox. So thank you, Kristine. I'm so grateful for the time and the thought and the care that you put into your presentation today. Thank you to those who attended. And I do want to tell you as well that our next session will take place on a date still to be determined, but it will be in the fall. And our guest will be Hannah Brown-Schock, who is the creator of Picture Book Theology. Hannah is a curriculum writer. She's a school psychologist. And the way I got to know her is she's a great lover of picture books. One of her passions is using picture books, not necessarily religious ones. In fact, mostly not, but to help children connect scripture and story with their own experience. So she loves to help children do theology and explore big questions. And she also loves to help churches, especially small congregations, learn to use picture books well in their own ministry with children. So that's going to be coming up in the fall. So keep following us on social media and watch for announcements about that webinar. Spread the word, and we hope you can join us. And I think that's it. So we're very grateful. Blessings to all of you as we continue through this Lenten season.